Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our reading of The Swiss Family Robinson. Today's chapter, The Hollow Tree. Let's get started. Next morning, the boys and I started with the cart, laden with our bundles of bamboos to attend to the avenue of fruit trees. The buffalo we left behind for his services were not needed. I wished the wound in his nostrils to become completely cicatrized before I again put him to work. We were not a moment too soon. Many of the young trees, which before threatened to fall, had now fulfilled their promise, and were lying prostrate on the ground. Others were bent, some few only remained erect. We raised the trees, and digging deeply at their roots, drove in stout bamboo props, to which we lashed them firmly with strong, broad fibers. Papa, said Franz, as we were less engaged, and he handed me the fibers as I required them. Are these wild or tame trees? Oh, these are wild trees, most ferocious trees, laughed Jack, and we are tying them up lest they should run away, and in a little while we will untie them, and they will trot about after us and give us fruit wherever we go. Oh, we will tame them, they shall have a ring through their noses like the buffalo. That's not true, replied Franz gravely, but there are wild and tame trees. The wild ones grow out in the woods like the crab apples, and the tame ones in the garden like the pears and peaches at home. Which are these, Papa? They are not wild, I replied, but grafted or cultivated, or as you call them, tame trees. No European tree bears good fruit until it is grafted. I saw a puzzled look come over the little boy's face as he heard this new word, and I hastened to explain it. Grafting, I continued, is the process of inserting a slip or twig of a tree into what is called an eye, that is, a knot or hole in the branch of another. This twig or slip then grows and produces not such fruit as the original stalk would have borne, but such as the tree from which it was taken would have produced. Thus, if we have a sour crab tree and an apple tree bearing fine Ribston pippins, we would take a slip of the latter, insert it in an eye of the former, and in a year or two the branch which would then grow would be laden with good apples. Do you think all these trees will grow? Asked Fritz, as we crossed Jackal River and entered our plantation at Tentholm. Here are lemons, pomegranates, pistachio nuts, and mulberries. I have little doubt of it, I replied. We are evidently within the tropics, where such trees as these are sure to flourish. These pines now come from France, Spain, and Italy, the olives from Armenia and Palestine, the figs originally from the island of Chios, the peaches and apricots from Persia, plums from Damascus and Syria, and the pears of all sorts from Greece. However, if our countries have not been blessed in the same way with fruit, we have been given wisdom and skill which has enabled us to import and cultivate the trees of other lands. We thus talked and worked until every tree that required treatment was provided with a stout bamboo prop. And then, with appetites which a gourmand might well have envied, we returned to Falconhurst. I think the good mother was almost alarmed at the way we fell upon the corned beef and prompt cabbage she set before us. But at length these good things produced the desired effect, and one after another declared himself satisfied. As we sat reclining after our labor and digesting our dinner, we discussed the various projects we had in contemplation. I wish, said my wife, that you would invent some other plan for climbing to the nest above us. I think that the nest itself is perfect. I really wish for nothing better, but I should like to be able to get to it without scaling that dreadful ladder every time. Could you not make a flight of steps to reach it? I carefully thought over the project and turned over every plan for its accomplishment. It would be impossible, I am afraid, said I, to make stairs outside, but within the trunk it might be done. More than once have I thought that this trunk might be hollow, or partly so, and if such be the case, our task would be comparatively easy. Did you not tell me the other day that you noticed bees coming from a hole in the tree? Oh, yes, said little Franz, and I went to look at them, and one flew right against my face and stung me, and I almost cried, but I didn't. Brave little boy, said I. Well, now, if the trunk be sufficiently hollow to contain a swarm of bees, it may be, for all we can tell, hollow the greater part of its length, for like the willow in our own country, it might draw all its nourishment, woo the bark, and in spite of its real unsoundness, retain a flourishing appearance. Master Jack, practical as usual, instantly sprang to his feet to put my conjecture to the proof. The rest followed his example, and they were all soon climbing about like squirrels, peeping into the hole and tapping the wood to discover by sound how far down the cavity extended. They forgot in their eagerness who were the tenants of this interesting trunk. They were soon reminded of it, however, for the bees, disturbed by this unusual noise with an angry buzz, burst out, and in an instant attacked the causers of the annoyance. They swarmed round them, stung them on the hands, face, and neck, settled in their hair, and pursued them as they ran to me for assistance. It was with difficulty that we got rid of the angry insects, and were able to attend to the boys. Jack, who had been the first to reach the hole, had fared the worst, and was soon a most pitiable sight. His face swelled to an extraordinary degree, and it was only by the constant application of cold earth that the pain was elevated. They were all eager to commence an organized attack upon the bees at once, but for an hour or more, by reason of their pain, they were unable to render me much assistance. In the meanwhile, I made my arrangements. I first took a large calabash gourd, for I intended to make a beehive, so that when we had driven the insects from their present abode, we might not lose them entirely. The lower half of the gourd I flattened. I then cut an arched opening in the front for a doorway, made a straw roof as a protection from the rain and heat, and the little house was complete. Nothing more, however, could then be done, for the irritated bees were still angrily buzzing round the tree. I waited till dark, and then when all the bees had again returned to their trunk, with Fritz's assistance, I carefully stopped up every hole in the tree with wet clay, that the bees might not issue forth next morning before we could begin operations. Very early we were up and at work. I first took a hollow cane and inserted one end through the clay into the tree down this tube with the pipe and tobacco. I smoked most furiously. The humming and buzzing that went on within was tremendous. The bees evidently could not understand what was going to happen. I finished my first pipeful, and putting my thumb over the end of the cane, I gave the pipe to Fritz to refill. He did so, and I again smoked. The buzzing was now becoming less noisy and was subsiding into a mere murmur. By the time I had finished the second pipe, all was still. The bees were stupefied. Now then, Fritz, said I, quick, with a hammer and chisel, and stand here beside me. He was up in a moment, and together we cut a small door by the side of the hole. This door, however, we did not take out, but we left it attached by one corner that it might be removed at a moment's notice. Then, giving the bees a final dose of tobacco smoke, we opened it. Carefully but rapidly, we removed the insects as they clung in clusters to the sides of the tree and placed them in the hive prepared for their reception. As rapidly, I then took every atom of wax and honey from their storehouse and put it in a cask I had made ready for the purpose. The bees were now safely removed from the trunk, but I could not tell whether when they revived from their temporary stupor, they might not refuse to occupy the house with which I had presented them, and insist on returning to their old quarters. To prevent the possibility of this occurrence, I took a quantity of tobacco and placing it upon a board nailed horizontally within the trunk, I lighted it and allowed it to burn slowly that the fumes might fill the cavity. It was well I did so, for as the bees returned to consciousness, they left their pretty hive and buzzed away to the trunk of the tree. They seemed astonished at finding this uninhabitable, and an immense deal of noisy humming ensued. Round and round they flew, backward and forward between the gourd and tree, now settling here and now there, until at length, after due consideration, they took possession of the hive and abandoned their former habitation to us, the invaders of their territory. By the evening they were quite quiet, and we ventured to open the cask in which we had stored our plunder. We first separated the honey from the honeycomb, and poured it off into jars and pots. The rest we then took and threw into a vessel of water, placed over a slow fire. It soon boiled, and the entire mass became fluid. This we placed in a clean canvas bag and subjected to a heavy pressure. The honey was thus soon forced out, and we stored it in a cask. Although not perhaps quite equal to the former batch in quality, it was yet capital. The wax that remained in the bag I also carefully stored, for I knew it would be of great use to me in the manufacture of candles. Then, after a hard day's work, we turned in. The internal architecture of the tree had now to be attended to, and early the following morning we prepared for the laborious task. A door had first to be made, so at the base of the trunk we cut away the bark and formed an opening just the size of the door we had brought from the captain's cabin, in which hinges and all was ready to be hung. The clearing of the rotten wood from the center of the trunk occupied us some time, but at length we had the satisfaction of seeing it entirely accomplished, and, as we stood below, we could look up the trunk, which was like a great smooth funnel, and see the sky above. It was now ready for the staircase. and first we erected in the center a stout sapling to form an axis round which to build the spiral stairs. In this we cut notches to receive the steps and corresponding notches in the tree itself to support the outer ends. The steps themselves we formed carefully and neatly of planks from the wreck and clinched them firmly in their places with stout nails. Upward and upward we built, cutting windows in the trunk as we required to admit light and air, until we were flush with the top of the center pole. On this pole, we erected another to reach the top of the tree, and securing it firmly, built in the same way round it until we at length reached the level of the floor of the nest above. To make the ascent of the stairs perfectly easy, we ran a handrail on either side, one round the center pillar and the other following the curve of the trunk. This task occupied us a whole month, and by the end of that period, so accustomed had we become to having a definite piece of work before us that we began to consider what other great alteration we should undertake. We were, however, of course, not neglecting the details of our colonial establishment. There were all the animals to be attended to. The goats and sheep had both presented us with additions to our flock, and these frisky youngsters had to be seen after. To prevent their straying to any great distance, for we had no wish to lose them, we tied round their necks little bells, which we had found on board of the wreck, and which would assist us to track them. Juno, too, had a fine litter of puppies, but in spite of the entreaties of the children, I could not consent to keep more than two, and the rest disappeared in that mysterious way in which puppies and kittens are wont to leave the earth. To console the mother, as he said, but also, I suspect, to save himself considerable trouble, Jack placed his little jackal beside the remaining puppies, and to his joy, found it readily adopted. The other pets also were flourishing and were being usefully trained. The buffalo, after giving us much trouble, had now become perfectly domesticated, and was a very useful beast of burden, besides being a capital steed for the boys. They guarded him by a bar thrust through the hole in his nose, which was now perfectly healed, and this served the purpose just as a bit in the mouth of a horse. I then made Master Nips sit upon his back and hold the reins I had prepared for him, that the animal might become accustomed to the feeling of a rider, and finally allowed Fritz himself to mount. The education of the eagle was not neglected. The bird, having been taught to obey the voice and whistle of his master, was soon allowed to bring down small birds upon the ring, when he stooped and struck his quarry in most sportsmanlike manner. Neither was Master Nips allowed to remain idle, for Ernest, now that he was in his possession, wished to train him to be of some use. With Jack's help, he made a little basket of rushes, which he so arranged with straps that it might be easily fitted to the monkey's back. Thus equipped, he was taught to mount coconut palms and other lofty trees, and to bring down their fruit in the hamper. Jack was not so successful in his educational attempts. Fangs, as he had christened his jackal, used his fangs indeed, but only on his own account. Nothing could persuade him that the animals he caught were not at once to be devoured, Consequently, poor Jack was never able to save from his jaws anything but the tattered skin of his prey. Not disheartened, however, he determined that Fangs could be trained, and that he would train him. These and such like employment afforded us the rest and recreation we required while engaged in the laborious task of staircase building. I then turned shoemaker, for I had promised myself a pair of waterproof boots, and now I determined to make them. Taking a pair of socks, I filled them with sand and then coated them over with a thin layer of clay to form a convenient mold. This was soon hardened in the sun and was ready for use. Layer after layer of caoutchouc I brushed over it, allowing each layer to dry before the next was put on until at length I considered that the shoes were of sufficient thickness. I dried them, broke out the clay, secured with nails a strip of buffalo hide to the soles, brushed that over with caoutchouc, and I had a pair of comfortable, durable, respectable looking waterproof boots. I was delighted. Orders poured in from all sides, and soon everyone in the family was likewise provided for. One objection to Falconhurst was the absence of any spring close by, so that the boys were obliged to bring water daily from the stream, and this involving no little trouble, it was proposed that we should carry the water by pipes from the stream to our present residence. A dam had to be thrown across the river some way upstream, that the water might be raised to a sufficient height to run to Falconhurst. From the reservoir thus made we led the water down by pipes into a turtle shell, which we placed near our dwelling, and from which the superfluous water flowed off through the hole made in it by Fritz's harpoon. This was an immense convenience, and we formally inaugurated the trough by washing therein a whole sack of potatoes. Thus day after day brought its own work, and day after day saw that work completed. We had no time to be idle, or to lament our separation from our fellow creatures. And that would be all for today. I'll see you all next time. See ya!